When the Arctic winter descends across the frozen expanse of the north, the temperature plummets to -40, -50, sometimes even -60 degrees Celsius. The sun disappears below the horizon for months at a time, and the wind howls across the barren ice with a ferocity that can strip the warmth from human flesh in mere minutes. In this merciless environment, where wood is scarce and stone is buried beneath meters of snow and ice, the Inuit people developed one of the most remarkable survival technologies in human history: the igloo, or as it is known in Inuktitut, the igloo. This was not simply a crude pile of ice blocks stacked together in desperation. The igloo was a precisely engineered thermal shelter, a masterpiece of physics and material science that allowed entire families to survive and even thrive through the darkest months of the polar winter. Understanding how the Inuit transformed the very element that threatened to kill them into a warm sanctuary requires us to examine not just the structure itself, but the deep knowledge of snow, heat dynamics, and human ingenuity that made this seemingly impossible feat a reality. The foundation of igloo construction begins with understanding snow itself, and the Inuit possessed a vocabulary for snow that reflected their profound relationship with this substance. They distinguished between dozens of different types of snow, each with its own properties and uses. For building an igloo, the master builder, often called an igluksak, sought out a very specific type of snow, known as pukangajuk. This is wind-packed snow, dense and cohesive, formed when Arctic gales compress falling snow into a material with structural integrity similar to limestone. The builder would venture out onto the tundra, probing the snowpack with a long bone probe or the blade of a snow knife, searching for that perfect layer where the crystals have bonded together under pressure but not yet become brittle ice. This search was critical because the wrong type of snow would crumble during cutting or would not bond properly when the blocks were stacked. The ideal snow had to be uniform in density, free of ice lenses that would create weak points, and thick enough to yield blocks of substantial size. Finding this perfect snow was itself a skill passed down through generations, a knowledge earned through countless winters of observation and experience. Once the ideal snow was located, the builder would begin the extraction process. Using a tool that looked deceptively simple, a knife with a blade between 30 and 40 centimeters long, often carved from bone or later fashioned from metal obtained through trade, the igluksak would cut into the snowpack. The technique required precision and understanding of how snow behaves under stress. Each block was cut to specific dimensions, typically about half a meter wide, 3/4 of a meter long, and 15 to 20 centimeters thick. The builder did not cut these blocks randomly, but shaped them with subtle variations. Blocks for the base were larger and thicker to support the weight of the structure above. As the dome rose, blocks became progressively smaller and more finely shaped. The cutting motion itself was deliberate, sawing through the compressed snow with long, smooth strokes that preserved the internal structure of the material. A hasty cut could introduce micro-fractures that would weaken the block. Each block was heavy, weighing perhaps 15 to 20 kilograms, and had to be lifted carefully to avoid breaking. The construction of the igloo began with a circle traced in the snow, the diameter determined by how many people would live inside and how much space was needed for sleeping platforms, a cooking area, and storage. A typical family igloo might measure 3 to 4 meters across at the base. The first course of blocks was laid in this circle, but this was where the true engineering brilliance emerged. The Inuit did not stack blocks in simple horizontal layers, like building a cylindrical tower. Instead, the igluksak cut the first course at an angle, creating a ramp that spiraled upward. This spiral pattern was the secret that allowed one person to build an entire igloo alone, and it distributed the compressive forces throughout the structure in a way that made the dome self-supporting. As each subsequent block was added, it leaned inward slightly, following the spiral up and around, creating an ever-tightening curve that culminated at the apex. Each block was shaped with the snow knife, the bottom surface beveled to create a tight seal against the blocks below, the side surfaces angled to match the curvature of the dome. The builder worked from inside the structure, shaping and placing each block with movements honed by years of practice. The gaps between blocks were not just left open, but were deliberately chinked with loose snow, packed into every crack and crevice. This chinking served multiple purposes. It eliminated drafts, it added structural integrity by binding the blocks together as the loose snow froze solid, and it began the process of creating an airtight envelope that would be critical for heat retention. The final block at the top, the keystone, required particular skill to place. The builder had to shape this block so that it could be lifted through the hole at the apex from inside, and then settled into position, locking the entire structure together. When this block dropped into place, the dome became rigid. The compression forces distributed through the spiral pattern, creating a shell strong enough that a grown man could stand on top without causing collapse. The entire construction process for a skilled igluksak site took between 1 and 2 hours in good conditions. This speed was not merely impressive, it was often essential for survival. A family caught in a sudden storm needed shelter immediately, and the ability to carve a warm refuge out of the killing cold with nothing but a knife and knowledge could mean the difference between life and death. But the structure itself was only the beginning. An igloo was not habitable immediately after construction. The builder had to cut an entrance, and this entrance was engineered with remarkable sophistication. Rather than cutting a simple door at ground level, the Inuit excavated a tunnel that sloped downward from the interior floor level and then back up to the surface. This tunnel, called a konichak, functioned as a cold trap. Because cold air is denser than warm air, it sinks, and this below-ground level entrance created a reservoir where the coldest air would settle and remain, unable to rise into the living space above. The tunnel also served as a windbreak, preventing the brutal Arctic winds from blowing directly into the shelter, and as a storage area for equipment, meat, and snow that could be brought inside for melting into drinking water. The entrance tunnel could extend several meters, and in semi-permanent winter camps, families would sometimes build larger connecting tunnels between multiple igloos, creating an entire complex of interconnected shelters. Inside the completed structure, the transformation from ice shell to livable home began with the construction of platforms. The igloo floor was excavated in tiers, with the sleeping platform raised highest. This elevation was crucial because warm air rises, and by sleeping on a raised platform that could be a half-meter or more above the entrance level, the family positioned themselves in the warmest zone of the igloo. The platform was not left as bare snow, but was insulated with layers of materials. First came willow branches if available, creating an air gap and a flexible base. Then came layers of thick caribou or muskox hides with the fur facing up, providing both insulation and comfort. Some families would lay down woven grass mats beneath the furs for additional insulation. The investment in this bedding was substantial, often requiring the hides of 10 or more caribou for a single-family platform, but this investment quite literally kept them alive. The combination of the raised platform and the insulating layers created a sleeping space where the temperature could be 10 to 15 degrees warmer than the air near the floor. The heating system of the igloo centered on the kulik, the soapstone oil lamp that was the heart of every Inuit home. This lamp was not a simple flame, but a carefully managed heat source that required constant attention and deep knowledge to operate safely. The kulik was carved from soapstone into a shallow bowl shape, sometimes with a small pouring spout at one end. The fuel was rendered seal oil or whale blubber oil, and this oil was absorbed into a wick made from Arctic cotton or dried moss. The woman of the household, who was the keeper of the kulik and whose skill with this lamp was considered as essential as the hunter's skill with the harpoon, would tend this flame throughout the day and banking it at night. She controlled the size and shape of the flame by adjusting the wick, creating a long, even line of fire across the length of the lamp that could measure 40 or 50 centimeters. The heat output could be adjusted by raising or lowering sections of the wick, and an experienced woman could maintain temperatures inside the igloo that allowed people to sit in comfort, wearing minimal clothing, while outside the temperature was 50 degrees below zero. The kulik provided not just heat, but also light during the months of polar darkness, and served as the cooking fire over which meat and fish were prepared. The science of why a structure made of frozen water could be heated without melting requires understanding thermal dynamics. The snow blocks of the igloo had a thermal conductivity far lower than ice. This was because of the air trapped within the snow's crystalline structure. Air is an excellent insulator, and the millions of tiny air pockets in each block created a barrier that slowed heat transfer. When the kulik was lit and the interior temperature rose, something remarkable happened. The innermost surface of the snow blocks would begin to melt slightly, creating a thin layer of water. But rather than continuing to melt and causing the structure to collapse, this water would refreeze almost immediately when the kulik was extinguished or reduced, creating a thin glaze of ice on the interior surface. This ice layer, ironically, helped seal the structure, making it more airtight and actually improving its insulating properties. The igloo became encased in its own thermal envelope. The process was self-regulating to a point. The interior temperature would stabilize at a level warm enough for human comfort, but not so warm as to cause structural failure. Typically, the interior temperature would reach 0 to 5 degrees Celsius, which seems cold by modern standards, but was remarkably comfortable when people were dressed in their caribou skin clothing and buried under additional furs at night. Ventilation was another critical element that the Inuit engineered with precision. A completely sealed igloo would lead to suffocation as the kulik consumed oxygen and people exhaled carbon dioxide. The solution was a small ventilation hole poked through the apex of the dome using a stick or bone tool. This hole allowed stale air and combustion gases to escape, while fresh air entered through the porous snow blocks and the entrance tunnel. The size of this ventilation hole could be adjusted by plugging it partially with a piece of fur or snow, allowing the inhabitants to balance heat retention with air quality. On particularly cold nights when the family wanted maximum warmth, they might nearly close the vent, carefully monitoring for signs of poor air quality, such as the lamp beginning to burn with a sooty flame or people becoming drowsy. During the day when cooking produced more smoke and steam, the vent would be opened wider. This constant adjustment and awareness of the igloo's atmosphere was part of the daily rhythm of life inside the shelter. Daily life in an igloo during winter followed patterns dictated by survival needs and the limitations of the environment. The family would wake in darkness, whether it was the actual polar night or simply the early morning hours before sunrise. The woman would rekindle the kulik from its banked overnight flame, gradually increasing its output to warm the living space. Frost that had formed overnight from the moisture of human breath would glisten on the interior walls, and this frost had to be carefully brushed or scraped away to prevent it from building up and reducing the insulating properties of the snow blocks. Breakfast might consist of frozen meat or fish that had been stored in the entrance tunnel or outside, thawed slightly over the lamp and eaten raw or lightly cooked. The hunter would prepare his equipment, some checking the lashings on his harpoon, testing the sinew strings of his bow, ensuring his snow knife was sharp. In the depths of winter, hunting often meant going after seals at their breathing holes in the sea ice, a pursuit that required patience, measured in hours of standing motionless in the dark and cold, waiting for the telltale sound of a seal surfacing to breathe. While the men hunted, women engaged in the equally vital work that kept the family alive. They processed the hides from previous hunts, scraping away fat and membrane using their ulu knives, a curved blade designed for precision work. They sewed and repaired clothing, using sinew thread and needles made from bone or ivory, creating seams that had to be absolutely watertight because a single wet spot on a parka or a pair of comic boots could lead to frostbite. They chewed on the soles of sealskin boots to keep them soft and pliable, because sealskin, despite being waterproof and durable, would stiffen in the extreme cold and become impossible to wear. Children played inside the warm igloo, learning through observation and participation the skills they would need as adults. Young girls learned to tend the kulik under their mother's watchful eye, learning to read the flame and understand when it needed more oil or when the wick needed trimming. Boys learned to fashion miniature harpoons and practice the patience of the hunter by sitting still for long periods. training their bodies and minds for the rigors they would face on the ice. The igloo accumulated moisture from cooking, from breathing, and from the simple presence of human bodies. This moisture would freeze on the walls and ceiling, and managing this frost was an ongoing task. Too much frost buildup would reduce the interior volume of the shelter and decrease insulation. The family would regularly scrape frost from the interior surfaces, collecting it in containers to be melted for drinking water. Obtaining fresh water in the Arctic winter was itself a significant challenge. Snow had to be melted, a process that consumed precious fuel. And the Inuit learned through experience that melting snow by eating it directly would dangerously lower core body temperature. Instead, containers of snow would be set near the kulik to slowly melt, and this water, once melted, would be carefully rationed and used for drinking and cooking. Every drop represented fuel burned and time spent, and nothing was wasted. As weeks turned into months, the igloo itself would undergo changes. The constant cycle of interior warmth and exterior cold, the wind scouring the outside surface, and the weight of new snow accumulating on the dome would cause the structure to metamorphose. The snow blocks would sinter together, the gaps between them disappearing as the material fused at a molecular level. The exterior surface would become polished by wind-driven snow crystals, smooth and hard as marble. The interior ice glaze would thicken incrementally. An igloo that began as a temporary overnight shelter could, with minimal maintenance, serve as a home for weeks or even the entire winter season. Some igloos in seasonal camps were rebuilt and reinforced year after year, becoming semi-permanent structures. These longer-term dwellings might have additional features, such as side chambers for storage or for housing dogs during the worst storms, windows made from clear freshwater ice, carefully harvested from a lake or river, and more elaborate entrance tunnels. The repair and maintenance of the igloo was a constant necessity. A crack in the dome from thermal stress or from the settling of the snow needed immediate attention, sealed with wet snow that would freeze solid. After a storm, the entrance tunnel might be partially or completely buried and would need to be excavated. The ventilation hole might freeze shut and need to be reopened. Caribou skins on the sleeping platform needed to be taken outside regularly and beaten to remove ice crystals that formed from condensed body moisture. The kulik itself required maintenance, with soot scraped from the bowl and wick material replaced as it was consumed. Everything in this life required attention, knowledge, and constant labor. But it was labor that meant survival. The cultural and spiritual dimensions of living in an igloo cannot be separated from the practical aspects. The igloo was more than shelter. It was a statement of human ability to adapt and thrive in conditions that would kill an unprepared person within hours. The knowledge of igloo construction was considered precious, passed from parent to child through observation and practice. Young people would help cut blocks, learn to judge snow quality, and gradually develop the eye for the subtle curves and angles that made the difference between a sturdy dome and a collapsing failure. Stories were told inside the igloo during the long, dark months, or stories of ancestors and spirits, of Sedna the sea goddess who controlled the animals of the ocean, of proper behavior toward the animals that gave their lives to feed the people. The cramped, warm space of the igloo drew families together, forcing an intimacy and cooperation that reinforced social bonds. Arguments could not be escaped by walking away, and patience and respect became essential virtues. The seasonal rhythm of igloo living followed the movements of game animals and the changing ice conditions. In autumn, as the sea ice formed and thickened, families would move out onto the ice itself to be near seal hunting grounds, building their igloos on the frozen ocean surface. These ice-dwelling months were times of relative abundance if the hunting was good, but they also brought risks of storms that could last for days, forcing families to remain inside the igloo, burning through their precious fuel reserves. In spring, as the days lengthened and the sun returned, the igloos themselves became liabilities. Stronger sunlight would weaken the structure, causing dripping and eventual collapse. This was the signal to shift to skin tents and to move to places where the ice was breaking up and whales and walrus could be hunted in open water. The igloo was thus part of a larger annual cycle of movement and adaptation, a winter strategy in an overall pattern of nomadic life tuned to the rhythms of the Arctic. When we consider the ingenuity of igloo construction and living, we must recognize that this was not simply a clever trick, but a complete system of survival knowledge. It required understanding materials science to judge snow quality. It demanded knowledge of structural engineering to build a self-supporting dome. It necessitated understanding thermodynamics to heat the shelter without destroying it. It called for skills in fire management, in food preservation, in clothing construction and maintenance. It required social cooperation and the transmission of knowledge across generations. The Inuit did not have universities or written textbooks, but they had something perhaps more valuable. A culture that valued observation, that rewarded skill and knowledge, and that understood that survival in the Arctic meant mastering every detail of the environment. The elder who could read the wind and predict a storm. The woman who could keep the quillic burning steadily through the night with minimal fuel. The hunter who understood seal behavior and could wait motionless for hours at a breathing hole. All of these forms of knowledge were equally essential and equally respected. The modern world looks at the igloo and often sees it as quaint or primitive. But there is nothing primitive about creating a comfortable living space from frozen water in temperatures that can kill in minutes. Engineers and architects study the igloo today, learning from its efficient use of materials, its structural elegance, and its thermal properties. The dome shape distributes stress evenly throughout the structure. The spiral construction technique allows for self-supporting assembly without scaffolding. The material itself is abundant, renewable, and leaves no trace when it melts in spring. In an age concerned with sustainable building and adaptation to extreme climates, the igloo stands as a testament to what human ingenuity can achieve when deeply connected to place and material. The Inuit lived not in spite of the ice, but because of it, transforming the Arctic's harshest element into their warmest refuge. Their legacy is not just in the physical structures they built, but in the demonstration of human capacity to thrive through knowledge, skill, and profound respect for the natural world.